As I slowly drove through this area looking at these big rocks, it got foggier and foggier. It was like the fog was made out of something that terrorized me. I was so uncomfortable. Everything in my mind was screaming at me, this is an ambush. My name is Joe Morris, and I was born in Minnesota. I'm prior military, so I went to Louisiana at Barksdale Air Force Base. After that, I worked casino security for 10 years. Then I worked a private security firm for just about a year and a half. And then I worked with TSA for 6 years. And now I'm retired.
And how did you
I'm
become
open.
interested
Oh,
in the subject? Mhm.
sorry. I'm also in Anchorage, or I don't usually stay in Anchorage. I usually stay in McCarthy, Alaska. So how did I get interested? A friend of mine and I worked at a lodge in McCarthy, Alaska. And it's kind of hectic at times, so I asked him if he wanted to take a break. We jumped in my old pickup and we went down some logging roads. Well, they were actually trails. They were old roads from the mining days. So we were just cruising along slow, and all of a sudden, I see this, there's a slight rise in the terrain, and I can see this head glide by. And that's it. That's all I saw. And I looked at it and I told my buddy, Bigfoot. And I'm not sure why I said it, but I told him, let's pull over and don't slam your door. And he grabbed his AR-15 and walked down about 60 yards and then walked into the glacier scrub. It was right next to a glacier. And once he went in, I walked in. I was thinking maybe he chased whatever it was past me and I could see it. So I looked around, I didn't see anything. Scanned left to right, nothing. And I scanned back to the left and I heard my buddy make a weird noise I'd never heard. He was scared. And I looked back and there was a Sasquatch there. I mean, not very far away. I could have thrown a rock and hit it. And it was about 6.5 feet tall. The hair was probably 3 inches. Uh, it was pretty wide, but it had the body of like a basketball player, not a bodybuilder. The other thing was it was in the sunlight, so I got to see it really well. And it was dark brown. It had the narrow waist like a human would. Obviously, it was in good shape. It never looked at me, not directly. It kind of glanced at me once, and I got to see its eye. And being in the sunlight, eyes shouldn't be, you know, your pupils should be little in the sunlight. This thing's was huge. And then the other thing was it had yellow or golden instead of the white like a human. Um, and then it took off running, and it ran at a absolutely inhuman speed, just absurd. I spent a lot of time in wildlife, weeks and weeks alone in the bush. So I see lots of wildlife, bears, moose, whatever. But this thing, it took off, and I'm not kidding. It took off at about 60 miles an hour, went about 75 yards, jumped over a bunch of downed little trees, just stepped right through them like a football player does on tires, and was gone. So my buddy and I talked about it, and he was all excited. My brain had a hard time registering it. It just really, really bothered me that I'd seen something that didn't exist. So, you know, what do? You just keep going. Life goes on. And that's where I got interested. Uh, I'm an injured vet, so I gotta walk all the time or I end up not walking. And when I'm in McCarthy, I walk this same trail. It's actually the trail I drove down. And I walk out to the toe of the Root Glacier, if anybody wants to look that up. Uh, and and in almost the same spot, just before the same spot, uh, I saw something that was unusual. It was it was a big stump, and it was in an area that was impossible to have a big stump. And the reason I say that is it's a retreating glacier, and there's no way for, a big tree to grow there. It's just not time enough. So I'm sitting there looking at this thing, and I'm thinking, how did it get there? I mean, I walk this trail every day. So I sit there and I watch it, and I smoke a cigarette, and all of a sudden, it looked like gold and eyes opened. So I walked towards it. I took out my weapon. I carry a 10 millimeter on my chest. And I took out my weapon and I walked towards it because I wasn't sure what it was. And my feet got trapped in some brush just for an instant. And I looked down, got my feet okay, and I looked up and it was gone. There was absolutely no tracks. I went over there, the leaves weren't disturbed. This thing, in my mind, just vanished. So, that's nothing to be scared of per se. So I still walk that same trail. And 2022, that's when I saw the stump disappear, or I didn't see it, but it disappeared. And then on that same trail, I saw a very large Sasquatch. This thing, it was about 60% outside of a tree, so it was 40% hiding behind a tree. And it was very dark and it appeared to be a shadow. And I was walking along and I saw it and I couldn't figure out what it was. So I walked towards it and stood there and looked at it. And then when my brain registered what it was, I was like, oh man. So I don't know if it was looking at me because I couldn't see its face or if it was looking away, but I assume it was looking at me. So I put my hand up and I said, hello, big brother. And I turned to the left and I walked my normal walk. And when I came back through, it was gone. So the next thing that occurred was down near Cordova, Alaska. It's in the Copper River Basin. It's a rainforest, a temperate rainforest. And I was down there. I live it down there. I used to live there 10 years. And I would go out as much as I possibly could into the wilderness and way out there. No humans around, all alone. And I believe that's why whatever they aren't scared because I'm alone. And by the way, the one that I saw close that was dark brown in the sunlight, when I did pull my weapon, because I thought it was a bear. That's just the way it is up here. If you see a big blob of brown near you, it's hairy, it's probably a bear. So I pulled this weapon and looked at this thing and immediately put it back because I knew it was a human. It's not, I don't murder people, so I'm not going to shoot this thing. Anyway, when I was down in Cordova at the Copper River Basin, there's this place I love to camp. Unfortunately, it's full of bears, but I still love to camp there. And to get there, you have to take a ferry to get to Cordova. And then you ride out 18 miles on this road. It's a dirt road. And you take a left and you go, 5 miles back into the bush. And that's where I set up camp. So one night, I'm actually not setting up camp. I was out there just goofing around fishing because there's a pond. and I hear these whoops and tree knocks, but they were far enough away where I didn't really care. Uh, Later that year, I had taken my girlfriend out and we were going to camp there. And there were more than you whips, the youps, whatever they call them, whoops and tree knocks. They started yelling back and forth a little bit. And we left. I didn't want to have, a girlfriend in danger. So anyway, I went back out there later and I planned to stay the night. And to get there first, you have to cross a couple salmon streams. And that time of year, they're just packed with salmon. So there's animals everywhere. But that time I went out there and it started with ravens hollering and then owls. And in my mind, it made sense because owls eat ravens. They love them. But the owls started making different sounds, and pretty soon it sounded like, I don't know, a 400-pound owl. It was obviously not an owl. And then coyotes kicked off, and then the coyotes didn't sound right at some point. And at one point, I believe it was the coyote yell, this thing screamed like a woman being killed, tortured. But in the scream, this thing, it talked. So it screamed and made, I don't know, almost like it was screaming a language out, but it sounded like a witch. And then they all started going off, to make a long story short. There were, I don't know how many, many, many. And they started yelling at each other and making all kinds of weird noises. And it was so dark, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. And then it was foggy also a little bit. So you can't see. And then off to my left, I hear this, I assume it's a big one. And it does this yell that I don't know how to explain it. It goes right through your body. They're just so loud. And then it laughed. And it did this deep demonic laugh. Oh, 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 oh. And it laughed for quite a while. And then one on my right, about 50 yards away, started laughing. And then they went back to their screaming stuff, and eventually they started laughing again. And I should have been terrified, but I ended up chuckling, laughing with them because it was so absurd. Uh, it was getting late, so I loaded everything in my truck and I drove actually farther back into the wilderness to the Sheridan Glacier. It's open, so, you can see if it were daylight and not foggy. Anyway, I got out there and walked out and relieved myself and looked around a little bit for tracks and never saw them. So I thought, cool. And I jumped in my truck and went to sleep. I got a Ford Excursion, so it's big, easy to sleep in. Uh, I was sleeping fine, and then I'm guessing maybe 2 in the morning, I hear rocks bouncing off the top of my SUV, and they're little ones. And I was so sleepy, I didn't realize it was rocks. I thought it was birds dropping, shells on the truck to break them open so they could eat them. But after I realized it was dark out, I knew it was rocks, pebbles. So believe it or not, I wasn't very upset, wasn't scared at all. And I just went back to sleep. So in the morning, I got up, looked around, no tracks, nothing, and went home. No, no big deal. Uh, that's about it for the Sasquatch stuff. I do have two other things that occurred.
Well, let me ask a couple of questions about all of these moments that you've had I would call them encounters. You've seen them, you've heard them, you've had, all of these experiences. The ones that you had eyes on, what were the similarities in those that you saw?
Well, they both appeared to be, in my mind, human. They were standing up straight. The smaller one, I got a really good look at. And what it was, compared to a human, its back was longer, its upper body, its arms were longer, and its feet or its legs were shorter. Uh, the big one I saw, it was as black can be. I don't know if it was looking at me. It was twilight. So, here in Alaska, it was probably 11 o'clock at night. It never really gets dark in the summer. So that one was like 12 feet tall. No kidding. It was massive. And its shoulders were probably 5 feet wide, maybe bigger. The only similarities were basically the body type, the way they were shaped. And then, of course, they're all hairy. The big black one, I didn't see really close. I mean, it was close, but not nearly as close as the little one.
Did they have a crest on their head, or was it more just rounded?
Their head was just like a human's. The big one, it didn't really have a neck.
So how did that make you feel when you saw these and they had such a human appearance to them? Did you feel like there was some kinship to human beings?
Yes, absolutely. I believe they're humans. They may have something else mixed in, but they have human in them. People. And to me, they registered as people.
And was that mostly from the way they looked, or was there something else in the way their mannerism, or something else that they conveyed that helped you to reach that conclusion?
Uh, I think it was the way they did act. They didn't do much. They didn't try to frighten me or anything, but the way they're built, similar to a human. And the little one, when it glanced at me, you can tell they're intelligent. They're just not a bear. They're not a moose. They're an intelligent person in my mind. And then if you want to go by feeling, sixth sense type thing, uh, if I see a bear and it's standing up and looking away from me, and it may look like a person, I can tell it's not a person. It feels different. Now, if a person's out there, you can tell it's a person. You can feel the guy. I don't know how to explain it. It's just the way it is for me.
Just a different
And
sense of what you were dealing with, whether it be a human being or an animal.
right. And I'm not kidding. I spend weeks and weeks in the bush, remote Alaska, where most people don't go. And I've seen many different animals. I mean, black bear, brown bear. I even saw a glacier bear, which you have to look it up to find out what it looks like. Uh, wolves, whatever. But when I saw this creature in the sunlight, my brain went through the folders of what it would be, and it came up with no answer. So I was looking at something that didn't exist, and I was very perplexed.
You said that they were laughing at one time, the vocalization sounds like laughter. And I did an interview with Scott Nelson, who's analyzed the Sierra sounds. And there was one point in that he pointed out to us the sound that it sounds exactly like laughter, like he's just said a joke or something, because he's
Yeah,
talking, and then it's just this sound like laughter.
yep.
I don't know if you've heard the Sierra sounds, or if you've heard that particular
I have
part
heard
of
them.
this.
The Sierra
Was it similar?
sounds,
Was it similar to that?
It is similar. I can pick out certain things from the Sierra sounds, and it's exactly what I heard. But I did hear talking. I heard laughing. I heard giggling, and I've heard that out in the woods, out by the Root Glacier. So there's nothing out there. It looks like the moon, it's just rock. So when you walk along, you can see everything. That's why I like it. And I walked past this one lower spot and looked in there, and nothing in there. And I went down towards the Root Glacier Lake, if you want to look it up. And as soon as I went over this little crest where I couldn't see that lower spot, I heard giggling. And it sounded like people or women, probably teenagers, speaking in Yupik. And Yupik is a native language out West Alaska. Uh, I've had my name called once, and I ignored it. I just kept going. That's pretty much all I've had.
And you never felt danger. You never felt like there was going to be any kind of interaction that would put you in harm's way.
Well, the little one, I didn't feel any danger. The big one, just because of its mass, I did feel a little danger. I was intimidated. But what are you going to do? If they want to kill me, I'm done, just like a grizzly bear.
That's true.
Um,
That's absolutely true.
the screaming, when at one point I did get concerned because they were getting so close. But I don't think they were screaming at me. I really believe I just stumbled upon what I call I think they were doing something called a potlatch. And a potlatch is just a celebration for Native Alaskans here. So it did sound like a potlatch. They were out there doing their thing, screaming, yelling. I just stumbled
Like
on them.
kind of like having a party of some sort or some kind of a celebration.
It sounded like they were partying their asses off.
Well, that's just a new one. I don't think I've ever heard that one before. So that's kind of interesting. What about structures in Alaska? Have you run across
Oh,
anything that seems very highly unusual or odd that you can associate with a Bigfoot?
yeah, probably. I'm not a Bigfooter. I'm a photographer and I hunt and things like that. I really don't look for Bigfoot. However, I have seen some really weird shit. One of them was, how they make these teepee things?
Mhm.
And it was massive. We're talking trees that were at times 24 to 30 inches around, and they were long. And they made this elaborate structure, and the Forest Service had it cut down. I can't blame them. The other thing is, in the similar area, that's probably a few miles away, there are trees that are upside down in a riverbank. So the roots are sticking straight up. I've seen that twice here in Alaska. One was on Latouche Island, and then the other one, it's just no name river. That's pretty much it.
Well, I'm sure my audience is going to be very envious because you're not going out trying to find Bigfoot and have had all of these encounters and experiences, and they're out there maybe every weekend looking in the woods for Bigfoot and find nothing. So I'm sure you're gonna have a few jealous people out there
And I
watching
have
this.
found tracks, so just a few. I got one I could send you, but yeah, you know, I don't look for them. I believe what happens is a photographer needs to get into a certain place to take pictures of wildlife. And that's usually an elevated position. And if you're hunting, you take the same position. So in my mind, a Sasquatch is going to take the same position as I am because we both have good views. And I think that's how we bump into each other. And I don't have dogs out there and there's not people. So I'm quiet. I don't sneak around, not usually, but just one guy out there all alone. They're not scared.
Exactly. So you said you'd had some other experiences. Tell me about those.
Okay. So I was in the Air Force from 88 to 92, and I guarded nuclear weapons and other things. But, oh yeah, I was a law enforcement troop, but I was tasked with guarding nukes and some other things. So one day I was doing a conventional weapons area storage check, and we call it CAS. CAS has no nuclear weapons in it. It's just regular explosive bombs and things like that. So I'm out there and I loved it. It was a nice, peaceful place, and I had the key. Nobody could get in. So I go to the gate and I open the gate and drive my truck in. And it was a little higher threat level because the Gulf War was starting off, the first Gulf War. And what happened was, as I slowly drove through this area, looking at these big locks with a spotlight to make sure everything's locked, it got foggier and foggier. And it was like the fog was made out of something that terrorized me. So I got, it was more and more difficult to go do my checks, but I had to do it. So at one point, I was so uncomfortable. I got out of the truck and I put around in my GAU, which is an M4 for everybody else. Checked on my 9mm, made sure everything was good because I don't know what I'm getting into. Got back in the truck, kept driving, and everything in my mind was screaming at me, this is an ambush. But what are you going to do? So I pull up the truck near these new bunkers, and all the locks are cut off, which is totally out of procedure. And I call it in, and they say, we don't have anybody to back you up at the moment. Clear the bunkers alone, which is totally against the rules. But there's nobody there to help. So, you just got to do it. So I go in and I clear these bunkers, and they're completely empty, which is awesome because there's no enemy combatants or terrorists. They leave junk behind. They just take what they want. So I knew the Air Force had done it. So I said, I'm clear. I'm going to come back to base. It was ways up, not off base, but it's a big base. So I pull up to this gate that I had to open to come into. And I'm still terrorized, literally, just can barely function. And I pulled this gate and it's like welded shut. So I'm like, oh no. Then I'm yanking on it. It won't move. It's unlocked, but it won't move. So I prayed and I pulled on the lock, pulled the gate. It's not open. And I knew whatever it was was behind me. I couldn't see it, but it just emitted this hateful, evil feeling. I mean, seriously, bad. And finally, I thought, the best way to try to get out of this is I walked up to the back of my truck where I felt like there's an entity there somewhere. And I said, would you please let me out of here? And I turned around, walked back to the gate. It slid right open. I jumped in my truck and drove it out, walked back in, slid the gate shut, locked it, and then you go over to a passenger gate on the right side, and you're supposed to use this big key to open this gate. So I get the big key out and I stick it in there and it won't turn. The thing's like frozen. So I pray again and it didn't work. And this thing felt like it was right behind me. I mean, almost touching me. So I just turned around and I said, would you please let me leave? And turned around, snapped that thing right open, locked the gate from the outside, went back to my truck, took out the mag, emptied the round out of the weapon and put it back in the mag. and was going to go back in service. But this thing was projecting this anger and hate towards me. I mean, absolutely horrible. So I walked up to it, up to the gate, and I said, "Thank you for letting me go." And it was like all the hate and spite. It was still evil, but all the hate and spite kind of went away and it went back towards the new bunkers. That's the way I felt. So anyway, I go back into base and my flight chief is gone. So I have to report to the day shift flight chief. And I go in there and knock and he says, "Enter." So I enter and he says, "So what happened?" And I said, "Oh," and I take it back. He said, "Did you see it?" And I said, I looked at him funny and I said, "No, I felt it." And he said, "I'm giving you a lawful order to never go back into that place alone. You will always have somebody with you. And if somebody tells you to go, you call them and tell them that I said, no way. You have to be accompanied." So that was the end of that one.
Well, that is a very interesting story. What do you think this was that you felt around you?
A demon.
And do you feel like it, why do you think it was centering on you that night at that location?
I don't think it was. I think I just happened upon it. It was a night that Barksdale actually released its uh, missiles into Iraq. And, I don't know what does. I don't know anything about demons other than they're evil. Uh, maybe, maybe the violence we were causing attracted it.
Have you had any other experiences with this sort of thing?
Just one, well, a couple. Uh, I've seen this thing and it doesn't seem dangerous. It's in the house. It's not in this house. Well, one time it was. I started seeing it in Louisiana. It's about a 3 foot tall thing. It's in a cloak, a black cloak. So the only thing you could see is his face and big eyes. And as weird as it sounds, it shakes back and forth like this, 6 inches or so. So fast, it's really hard to see. Hard to explain. It's super fast. It can run or move ridiculously fast. And I've seen it 3 times
And where else did you see it besides in Louisiana?
in this condo and once in Minnesota.
Do you think it follows you around specifically then?
I guess. I don't know. It doesn't
Yeah,
bother me. Doesn't scare me.
it's just you just see it occasionally.
I see it, and then if I look away and look back, it's gone. And even one time, I woke up and I looked over and it was there. It wasn't real close. It stands off about 12 feet or so. And I was so tired. I'm like, I just don't care. And I went back to sleep. And that's the last time I saw it.
Now, would you classify this as something demonic as well?
I don't know what it is. It doesn't seem evil. It just, it scared the shit out of me once when I ran down the hallway in my kids' room, went in my kids' room. And I went in there and looked and it was gone. But that's the only thing that scared me on it.
So besides that and this feeling that you had before that was trying to obviously hinder your natural rounds and getting out of this place, have you had anything else happen?
No, not really. Not that I can think of. I saw a ghost once. Pretty boring story, but I worked at a lodge and the ghost basically walked through my apartment and through the next guy's apartment. I went through a wall and I was maintenance, so I opened the dang apartment. It was empty and went in there and looked around. There was nobody there. It's an old cannery. There's 200 people out there that are in a mass grave.
Well, let's go back to this time that that you were making your rounds and this fog came in. And it was obviously a dense fog, but it was more intimidating than just not being able to see. You had a real strong feeling about this, the density of it. Did it have any certain hue or color to it, or any kind of texture that you could feel within it?
No, there was no, it was just like it was kind of like a fog machine kicking on. Uh, no, it was just, looked like regular fog, but as it enveloped me, and I'm not kidding, I'm not a scaredy cat. I was terrorized. It is the most scared I've ever been in my life. I've been charged by bears, moose have messed with me. Airplanes, you get dumped off someplace, aircraft don't pick you up for a few days. That is nothing compared to what I felt that day.
What did you think was going to happen from this fog?
Uh, I don't think it was the fog that concerned me. It was the actual entity. There was something very evil there.
Did you feel like it was closing in on you, that you couldn't breathe, or was it just not knowing what was going to happen from what was causing this?
I wasn't concerned about, well, you're always concerned about getting killed in the service, but I wasn't concerned about that. It was just hard to explain. It's almost like if somebody could, shoot a drug into you and it caused you to be terrorized. That's exactly what it was.
You felt like it
It,
was going to do something that would cause you to be incapable of being in control of yourself or something?
no, uh, I was armed and I've been trained pretty well. So, of course, I was, you know, had my M4 or GAU-5 in my hand, and I was calling out to see if there was anybody there. I was more concerned about getting ambushed because it
So
was heavy fog. I would know where they were. That's the concern.
did you
Uh,
ever did you ever find out who cut those locks?
yeah, uh, Missile Maintenance Squadron. They'd have
Okay,
cut them
so
open.
that was just a normal thing that had happened.
It's not really normal, but it comes with this long answer, which is they had to get the fuses. They were running late. They couldn't wait for the cops, so they cut them off.
But kind of an odd coincidence that happened to be at the same time that you had this weird fog that's
I
hanging out.
agree.
Yeah, that does seem a little scary, doesn't it? That it came in at
But I thought maybe that's what initiated this demon to come in the area. We were going to create horrible violence, and we did. The weapons do crazy things. So I thought maybe it was attracted to us because we were going to go out there and kill a bunch of people. I don't know.
yeah, it's kind of scary. Has anyone else reported anything like that at this facility, or anyone else that you know in the military with the fog or some kind of an evil entity that appears?
Out at the WSA, which is the nuclear weapons storage area, there was an M60 gunner uh, on patrol, and he saw the lady in white. And the reason I know about it, and he's a good guy. He's not crazy. We all had psych tests and everything. And what happened is he saw the lady in white and he actually challenged her because there's not supposed to be anybody out there other than military. And there's got to be only certain military out there. Not everybody can go into weapons storage area. So this lady in white appeared. He didn't know where she came from. And he challenged her and she disappeared. So he called his flight chief and told him what happened and said, I think I'm going crazy. So he- they brought the gunner in, and the reason I know about it is I was there when they cleared the weapon. That was it. What else was there? That's pretty much it. There's always weird stuff on nuke bases. Always.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think that nuclear bases tends to draw in more of this phenomenon?
I think if you fire off a nuclear weapon, it totally screws up, if you want to call them aliens, a lot of their technology. That's why they follow, the ships that have nuclear power. And when I was in, it was actually common knowledge for the cops that UFOs were real. They'd hang out over the missile sites and they'd set an alarm off. And then, cops like me would go out there and sit there and look at it.
Do you, so you believe that these alien craft or these alien beings have some kind of influence or power over your nuclear weapons?
Yeah, I do.
I've heard that reported before, under certain conditions that the nuclear weapons were made unusable in some fashion.
Yeah. Yeah, they burned out the guidance systems on 10 of them. I think that was Maelstrom.
So is that a real concern for the military?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I work nukes. Nukes need to be fired and they have to be, well, put it this way. When you fire a nuke, it's got to be 99.9% ready to go. If these things are going to burn out guidance systems or whatever, that's not 99.9% ready to go. So yeah, everybody's worried about it in the service when it comes down to nukes.
What about other countries that have nuclear power? Do you know if the aliens are on one side or the other, if it's just generally nuclear forces that they're against?
I think it's just generally, I don't know. I'm not an expert in it, but I think it's all nukes. Russia's
So,
reported UFOs.
so the odds of having a nuclear world war is pretty limited if the aliens have any say about it.
I guess, I lived through the real Cold War and I'm not worried about nuclear war. But yeah, I guess they could help. They could stop it. There is a video of one zapping this missile and knocking it out of the air.
An alien or a craft or something like
Yeah,
that.
it was a UFO, flew up there. Apparently the rocket was going like 18,000 miles an hour. This thing pulled right up next to it, shot it once in the guidance system, and then it shot it in the booster, and the booster broke apart.
Wow, that is interesting. So how do you think Bigfoot and these aliens do you think they have anything in common?
Yeah, I don't think they're aliens. I think they're demons. And in my opinion, that's why the U.S. government doesn't want to release the information because they've been working with demonic forces. And I don't think people like that. So, uh, so in my opinion, most aliens are demons. And in my opinion, I think it's Dr. Meldrum. She did a DNA study and it came back. They had human DNA, female, and two others. I believe one was a bear and the other one was unknown. So in my mind, you know, they're partly demon.
Well, yeah, I've heard of that study too. That's interesting. So what else can you tell me from, you've had such a vast variety of experiences from seeing Bigfoot to all of your days in working with the military forces. What else can you tell me?
I don't know. I can't think of anything. I've seen tracks, that's it. I stomped some out. I used to be a fishing guide up in, well, I was a fishing guide on the Catawba River. And I would go up there before the other guides got out there just to check the river, make sure the fish were there and all the cabins were good. And one day I did see small toddler tracks like a human. And there's nobody out there for a long ways. And I saw medium-sized tracks, and these were in the mud. So the little one just walked across the mud. The medium-sized one punched into the mud, you know, maybe 6, 7 inches. And then the one off to the side, it punched into the mud so far, I don't even, it was ridiculous. So I stomped out all those tracks because I didn't want my clients coming up and freaking out.
Yeah, I can understand and appreciate that. Well, you have been a wonderful guest. I appreciate everything you've shared with us, and some food for thought, some things I'll have to really give some deep consideration of. Makes me think.
Yeah, I
Something.
don't know what these guys are for sure, but luckily for me, they haven't been violent. Here in Alaska, you probably know it, they're very violent to some people, but
You've
hopefully
gone,
it doesn't happen to me.
you've flown under the radar a little bit with them, maybe because you don't seem like a threat to them either.
Yeah, probably. I'm not a threat to them. I'm not going to hurt them.